I worked myself to exhaustion for 7 years to save my father's home. Then he dragged me into court and called me a thief. He had no idea who he was dealing with. The marshal handed me the envelope at 6:47 on a Tuesday evening. I was in my kitchen. Leftover pad thai, glass of water, the kind of unremarkable Tuesday that has no business becoming the worst night of your life. He looked uncomfortable, which in retrospect was the kindest thing anyone did for me that week. Caroline Sinclair? I nodded, fork still in my hand. He held out the thick white envelope the way you'd offer something that might bite. You've been served. Have a good evening, ma'am. I stood there for a long time after the door closed. Then I read the heading and the fork hit the floor. Daniel Sinclair, plaintiff vs. Caroline Sinclair, defendant, fraud, undue influence, conversion of property, conspiracy to commit financial exploitation. My father, the man whose mortgage I had been paying in secret every single month for 7 years, was suing me for $1.2 million. He wanted my home, the one I'd been paying for since before his ink on the bankruptcy filing was even dry. I read it 3 times. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor, the expensive tile I'd chosen myself, in the apartment I'd worked myself half to death to afford, and I laughed until it turned into something else entirely. Because here's the part my father didn't know. The part that would destroy him in front of every person whose opinion he had ever cared about. I already owned that house, had for 3 years. He was suing me for property I legally, notarially, county clerk certified owned. And in 13 days, he was going to find that out in a Westchester County courtroom packed with 200 of his closest colleagues, all of whom he had personally invited to watch me fall. This is the story of what happened when he got exactly what he asked for. My name is Caroline Sinclair. I'm 32 years old, and I am a CPA, top 5% on the New York licensure exam, if anyone's keeping score. My father certainly wasn't. To Daniel Sinclair, I was the daughter who chose spreadsheets over steel, the one who played with calculators, the polite footnote at the end of every sentence that began with my brother Ethan's name. Ethan developed commercial real estate. Ethan had calluses. Ethan understood what real work looked like. Me? I sat behind a computer all day. My father built his reputation over 30 years laying foundations across New York. Sinclair Development Group, hard hat, firm handshake, the kind of man who still believed your word was your bond and your bond was proven by the roughness of your hands. He wasn't a bad man, not always, but he had a framework for what success looked like, and I didn't fit inside it. At job sites, when clients asked about his family, he'd spend 20 minutes on Ethan's latest deal. Then he'd add, "Oh, and my daughter Caroline. She works with numbers." The irony, which I stored like fuel for approximately 7 years, was that I was managing financial portfolios worth more than everything he'd ever built, combined. But he didn't need to know that, not then. What he also didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I could see the disaster coming long before it hit. The Jersey City Project, a $15 million mixed-use development that was supposed to be his legacy, his name on a building, his future secured. Instead, it took everything. In March of 2018, his primary investor pulled out. 2 more followed within 6 weeks. Sinclair Development Group filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and just like that, 30 years of reputation became a cautionary story told over bourbon at the same poker table where he'd once been the star. Their marriage didn't survive it. My mother filed for divorce in early 2019, packed 30 years of herself into 2 suitcases, and moved to San Diego. She walked away with half of nothing and left behind the house in Scarsdale, the one my grandfather built with his own hands in 1962, the one where my grandmother's chandelier still hung in the foyer, the one where pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe tracked me and Ethan growing up year by year, half inch by half inch. That house had a mortgage, a big one. And when the bankruptcy hit, the math was ugly. Balloon payments, a second lien, an adjustable rate that had adjusted at precisely the worst time. Without intervention, the bank would have it by late 2018. No one else was running those numbers, so I did. And then I made a decision I never told anyone about. $6,800 every month. That's what foreclosure prevention costs when your father's credit is wrecked, and you're routing payments through a dormant joint account he forgot existed, sending statements to a P.O. box he doesn't know about, and working 3 jobs to cover it. Days, a senior associate position at a top-tier accounting firm. Evenings, consulting contracts under my mother's maiden name, C. Mitchell, for Zenith Urban Labs and Blue Peak Engineering. Weekends, forensic accounting work for law firms that needed someone who could find the numbers other people were trying to hide. 4 hours of sleep, protein bars, black coffee. That was my life from April 2018 through March 2025. 84 consecutive months. I missed weddings. I canceled dates, then stopped making dates worth canceling. I spent Christmas Eve 2020 inside a year-end audit at 11 p.m. while my colleagues posted photos with their families. One night, my colleague Sarah Brennan found me slumped over my desk at 3 a.m., my laptop still running Excel projections, my coffee cold beside me. "Caroline," she put her hand on my shoulder, "you're going to burn yourself out. Whatever this is, it better be worth it." Every time I walked through that front door in Scarsdale and saw my grandmother's chandelier, I told myself yes. Every time I passed those pencil marks in the doorframe, I told myself yes. I documented everything. Every transfer, every payment, every bank statement filed and organized chronologically in a safety deposit box at the Chase branch on 5th Avenue. I don't know what I was preparing for exactly. I just knew that silence about money has a way of turning dangerous, and I wanted receipts. I had no idea how right I was. Laura Bennett arrived in 2022 like a controlled burn. She met my father at a builder's lawyer's convention. 33 years old, real estate background, a paralegal certificate she deployed like a weapon, and just enough legal vocabulary to make dangerous moves sound procedural. She made my 58-year-old father feel untouchable again. They married 6 months later. Courthouse ceremony. I wasn't invited. He told me over the phone, "It's just paperwork. You understand, right?" I understood plenty. I started noticing things, small things at first. My father grew defensive when I visited. Laura was always just organizing Daniel's files whenever I caught her somewhere she shouldn't be. One afternoon, I walked into his study and found her phone pointed at documents on his desk, camera app open. "Just cataloging everything," she said, flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Behind her phone screen, I caught a glimpse of a property estimate, $1.2 million. That night, standing in the driveway, I heard her voice through an open window. "Daniel, this house is worth over $1 million, and your ungrateful daughter is circling it like a vulture." She had just enough information to be convincing and just enough ambition to be dangerous. "She's been planning this for years," I heard her press. "Why else would a single woman her age still be hanging around? No relationship, no life of her own? She's obsessed." And my father, the man who had always preferred a simple narrative to a complicated truth, believed her. Of course he did. 2 weeks later, she pushed him to get the house appraised. Then she found a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. Victor Hale of Hale & Associates, known throughout Westchester for high-stakes asset disputes. Victor Hale, whose firm I would later learn had once employed Laura Bennett, a detail that should have been disclosed to the court and wasn't. The trap had been set. I just didn't know it yet. The morning after I was served, I called my mother in San Diego. She picked up on the second ring. I heard her gasp before I even finished explaining. "That man," she whispered, "after everything you've done for him. He doesn't know about the payments, Mom." "Then tell him. He's already filed. This is public now. 200 people are going to see it." There was a long silence, the kind that only comes between two people who know each other so well they can hear each other thinking. "You kept everything, right?" she finally said. Her voice was steady now, certain. "Every record." "Yes." "Then let him destroy himself. Call Andrew Cole. You remember him. CPA study group. Now he's a litigator. He's good, Caroline. Call him." I ended the call and stared at the summons. At the bottom, in my father's handwriting, was a note. "Don't embarrass yourself further by fighting this." I dialed Andrew Cole at 9:43 p.m. He answered immediately. "Caroline Sinclair, to what do I owe this? My father is suing me." 3 seconds of silence. "Clear my calendar. How fast can you get to my office?" 2 hours later, I was sitting across from Andrew in his downtown Manhattan conference room with 7 years of documented silence spread across the table between us. Bank statements, transfer records, tax returns, payment receipts, a complete chain of custody going back to April 2018. Andrew looked at it all for a long time. He turned a document over, then another. His expression moved through concern, then disbelief, then something that looked almost like anger. "Caroline." He held up a deed I had largely forgotten about. "This transfer, June 15th, 2021. I looked at it. Your father signed the house over to you, fully executed, notarized, filed with the county clerk's office. You've owned the property free and clear for 3 years." I set down my coffee. He was drunk. Laura had walked out after a fight. He came to me. He was terrified about losing everything. He thought he was signing refinancing paperwork. Andrew shook his head. "Doesn't matter. It's legal. It's notarized. It's filed." My phone buzzed. A message from my mother, sent to both of us on a whim, the way she sometimes does. "Whatever happens, I'm proud of you." Andrew leaned back in his chair and I watched him assemble the picture in his mind. "Your father just sued you for a house you've legally owned for 3 years. He organized a public audience for it. He posted about it publicly." He paused. "Caroline, your father just signed his own professional obituary." I leaned forward. "Andrew, I need you to pull the Brooklyn Contractors Association directory. He mentioned at Thanksgiving he was inviting people." Andrew's expression sharpened. "How many people are we talking?" By the next morning, we knew. 2 chartered buses from the association. Over 200 confirmed attendees. A PR firm, Kensington PR, had been hired. 3 reporters credentialed. My father wasn't just suing me. He was staging a spectacle. He had posted in the Contractors Association group, "Friends and colleagues, I need your support on November 15th at Westchester County Supreme Court. My own daughter is trying to steal my home through fraud. Come witness what happens when we stand up to entitled millennials who think they deserve everything without earning it." Over 800 reactions, hundreds of comments, brutal ones. Then Andrew scrolled to a comment from Charles Whitaker, CEO of Whitaker Infrastructure, one of my biggest clients, working under the C. Mitchell name, who had written, "Daniel, is this the same daughter who's a CPA? The one you told me couldn't run a lemonade stand?" My father had replied, "That's the one. Biggest disappointment of my life. Never held a real job. Now she wants what I spent 30 years building." Andrew set down his phone. "He has no idea you saved Whitaker from collapse last year." "I work under my mother's maiden name," I said. I didn't want his reputation attached to mine. We spent the next 10 days building the case. Kevin Brooks, the senior accounts manager from Chase, who had watched my payments come through for 7 years at 2 and 3 a.m., agreed to testify. Diane Parker, 22-year veteran of the county clerk's office, would authenticate the deed in person, and one by one, the CEOs I'd worked for, Whitaker, Blue Peak, Zenith Urban Labs, submitted statements, then chose to appear in person. "Whitaker is flying back from Miami," Andrew told me the night before the hearing. "He's not happy about your father's accusations. He wants to be there." I sat in my apartment that night, unable to sleep. sleep. My laptop screen glowed. 3 emails had arrived after midnight. Charles Whitaker, Caroline, you saved my company. Tomorrow everyone will know. Blue Peak Engineering, your audit uncovered $800,000 in internal theft. We owe you everything. Zenith Urban Labs, your tax strategy saved us $700,000. We're proud to stand with you. Then my phone rang. FaceTime. My mother's face appeared, eyes red. I booked a flight, she said. I'll be there by noon. Mom, you don't have to? Yes, I do. I should have stood up to him years ago. She paused, composing herself. There's something you need to know about that deed transfer. I went still. I was on the phone with him that night, she said quietly. He was drunk and crying, and he said, at least Caroline will take care of things. She always does, even when I don't deserve it. Silence stretched between us. He knew exactly what he was signing, she whispered. He just doesn't remember. I set the phone down and looked at the key to my safety deposit box sitting on my nightstand. 7 years, 84 payments, $571, $200, dollar by dollar, sacrifice by sacrifice, every transfer timestamped and documented and filed in perfect order. Andrew texted at 12:15 a.m. Can't sleep either. Remember, let him go first. Let him tell everyone how useless you are. Every word he says is another nail in his own coffin. Your silence at the right moment will be louder than anything you could say. Westchester County Supreme Court, November 15, 2024, 8:45 a.m. The buses from the Brooklyn Contractors Association were already parked outside when I arrived, lined up like they were waiting for a game. Men in flannel and steel-toed boots streamed toward the entrance carrying Dunkin' cups, familiar faces from every barbecue and holiday party where I'd spent years being politely ignored. That's her, someone said, not bothering to lower his voice. The one stealing his house. My father arrived at 8:55 in a black Mercedes, Laura at his side in a designer suit that probably cost more than my first month's rent in the city. 5 attorneys from Hale and Associates followed, each carrying leather briefcases like armor. He saw me on the steps, and his voice carried across the crowd. I hope you're ready to apologize, Caroline. It's not too late to stop embarrassing yourself. Andrew appeared at my elbow. 3 reporters just started writing, he murmured. Let him perform. What my father didn't notice, because he was working the crowd, shaking hands, accepting the warm reinforcement of men who believed his version, were the 3 CEOs seated quietly in the back rows. He didn't notice Kevin Brooks from Chase reviewing documents with careful precision. He didn't notice Diane Parker from the county clerk's office holding a sealed folder against her chest. And he definitely didn't notice the 15 women scattered throughout the gallery. Contractors, engineers, architects, women who had built things with their hands and their minds. Some wore hard hats, others were in sharp business attire. None of them were there for him. One of them caught my eye and gave a small nod. They'd heard a different version of the story, one that had been traveling faster than he knew. The Honorable Eleanor Whitman entered at 9 a.m. exactly. Silver hair, black robes, the kind of judicial composure that comes from 3 decades of watching people lie under oath. She swept the packed gallery with a single look and raised one eyebrow. Mr. Hale, she said, is there a reason this courtroom is at capacity for what should be a routine property dispute? Victor Hale stood with the confidence of a man who had choreographed every moment. Your Honor, given the seriousness of the allegations, my client felt community support was appropriate. Her tone said everything her words didn't. Proceed. Hale's opening was polished, rehearsed, financial exploitation, calculated deception, a pattern of manipulation spanning several years. He gestured toward me like I was a specimen. No verifiable employment, no independent assets, living parasitically off a vulnerable man. The word fraud landed hard in the silent courtroom, and I watched it ripple through the gallery. Andrew stood for exactly one sentence. The defense will show these accusations are not only false, but so disconnected from reality they constitute malicious prosecution. We have documentary evidence that will fundamentally alter everything this court believes it knows about this case. Then my father took the stand and performed. She's never held a real job in her life, Your Honor. She plays with spreadsheets, calls it accounting. Meanwhile, real professionals like my son actually build things. Laughter from the gallery. Warm, confirming laughter. I tried to be a good father, gave her opportunities, but she's always been after my money. More nods, more murmured agreement. He turned slightly toward his poker friends, reading the room like a man who has been the funniest person at every table he's ever sat at. I doubt she even knows what a mortgage payment looks like, let alone how to calculate interest. Andrew leaned toward me. His voice was barely a breath. That's 3 counts of perjury so far. Keep counting. Then Laura took the stand. Manicured hands, carefully modulated voice, just enough emotion to read as sincere, never so much it tipped into theater. She described me as obsessive, unstable. She had found hidden financial records, she said, large sums moving through complicated accounts. I used to work as a paralegal, she added, lowering her voice confidentially. I recognize money laundering when I see it. The gallery absorbed every word. She said she'd overheard me on the phone saying everything was going according to plan and that he had no idea what was coming. She said she was genuinely concerned about what I might be capable of. Judge Whitman cut through it immediately. Do you have any documentation to support these claims? Laura hesitated. Well, no, but I see. You may step down. But the damage was done. The room had turned. I could feel it like pressure on my chest. One of the contractors stood up and shouted, "Gold digger!" Someone else, "Shame on you." Laura dabbed at her eyes with with a tissue, performance flawless. Even Charles Whitaker was watching me in tense silence, trying to reconcile two different versions of a person. My father stood from his chair and turned to face his audience like a man delivering a verdict. This is what happens when you raise an entitled child, someone who thinks the world owes her everything. She never built anything, she just takes. Judge Whitman's voice cut through the room. Miss Sinclair, your counsel may proceed. Andrew stood, slowly, one manila folder in his hand. He let the silence sit for exactly 3 seconds. Your Honor, the defense calls the defendant to the stand. 200 pairs of eyes followed me to the witness box. The room had the particular quality of silence that precedes something irreversible. I placed my hand on the Bible. 7 years pressed down on me at once. Miss Sinclair, Andrew said, voice steady and unhurried, do you have something to present to the court? Yes, Your Honor. I opened my briefcase. I would like to submit Exhibit A. I held up the document. This is a certified copy of a deed transfer from the Westchester County Clerk's Office, dated June 15, 2021. It transfers full and complete ownership of the Scarsdale property from Daniel Sinclair to Caroline Sinclair. The silence was absolute. My father's mouth opened. Nothing came out. That's not possible, he finally said. I never signed the house my father is suing me for, I said, my voice clear and even. I already own. I have owned it since 2021. Victor Hale shot to his feet. Objection. This document was not presented during discovery. It's a public record, Your Honor, Andrew said without blinking. However, due to how the plaintiff's filing was structured, it was indexed in a category that wasn't flagged during standard title searches. That oversight sits with the plaintiff's counsel. Vittman looked at the document, then at Hale. I'll allow it. Laura was on her feet. She forged it. That has to be forged. The gavel came down hard. Order. Your Honor, I continued. Diane Parker from the county clerk's office is present and can verify authenticity. The crowd parted as Diane Parker walked forward. 22 years at the clerk's office. The kind of person who has witnessed 10,000 signatures and remembers the ones that matter. She was sworn in, opened her folder, and held up the original deed. Raised seal visible from 3 rows back. This is the original deed transfer filed June 15, 2021 at 3:47 p.m. I processed it personally. She indicated the signature line. Mr. Daniel Sinclair's signature. Notarized by Jennifer Walsh. License number 487291. Impossible, my father said, his voice hollowing out. I would never. Diane didn't raise her voice. She never had to. Mr. Sinclair, you appeared distressed, but you stated multiple times that you understood the document and wished to proceed. You said your daughter was the only person who truly cared about you and that you wanted to make things right. A shockwave moved through the room. Reporters writing, people turning to each other. The notary hesitated. Diane added, you insisted you were of sound mind. She consulted her notes. You returned the following week to confirm the transfer was complete. You said, she read carefully, I want to make sure Caroline gets what she deserves for everything she's done. Laura's face went white. Daniel, her voice cut across the room. You told me the house was yours. Judge Whitman fixed her gaze on Hale with the patience of someone who has seen this before and is no longer surprised by it. Mr. Hale, your client is suing Miss Sinclair for property she has legally owned for 3 years. How do you explain that? Hale flipped through his papers, searching, finding nothing. I stayed standing. That's not all, Your Honor. I'd like to submit Exhibit B. Andrew handed over the second folder. 84 consecutive mortgage payments, all made from the defendant's personal accounts. Your Honor, Kevin Brooks from Chase Bank is here to verify. My father's eyes moved to Kevin Brooks, who was already walking toward the stand. The color had drained entirely from his face. No, my father said, barely audible. That's not, she couldn't. Oh, but I did, Dad, I said quietly. Every single month for 7 years. While you called me worthless, I was protecting everything you had left. Kevin Brooks settled into the witness stand with the composure of someone who has spent his career around large numbers and stopped being impressed by them. He opened his folder with careful precision. From April 2018 through March 2025, exactly 84 consecutive payments of $6,800 were made on the mortgage for the Scarsdale property. He turned a page. Every payment came from accounts owned by Caroline Sinclair. Total amount paid, $571,200. Without these payments, the property would have entered foreclosure proceedings by October 2018. The room had gone completely still, and Mr. Sinclair's contributions during that same period, Kevin didn't hesitate. 0. Not a single payment. Mr. Sinclair has not maintained an active account with our institution since his bankruptcy filing. A chair scraped loudly in the gallery. One of the contractors stood up, voice raw. Daniel, you told us she was draining you. You said she was bleeding you dry. Judge Whitman raised her gavel. But the dam had cracked. Miss Sinclair made these payments while working extreme hours. Kevin continued. Our records show transfers at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., often minutes after her direct deposits cleared. She never missed a single payment, even when it left her accounts nearly empty. He turned another page. In December 2019, she paid $27,500 to stop foreclosure when a balloon payment came due. She liquidated her entire 401k, incurring significant tax penalties. Somewhere behind me, a sound, quiet, broken. I didn't look. I knew it was my mother, who had slipped in during the testimony and was sitting in the last row. My father's voice came out barely holding together. But why didn't she tell me? I looked at him directly for the first time. Because you would have refused, I said. Your pride would have chosen foreclosure closure over accepting help from your disappointment of a daughter, so I did what I've always done. A pause. I fixed everything quietly while you took the credit. Andrew called the next witness. Charles Whitaker stood from his seat in the gallery, and the room shifted the moment people recognized him. One of the biggest names in New York construction, a man my father had been trying to secure a contract with for 5 years. After being sworn in, Whitaker looked out at the courtroom, and then deliberately at my father. Last year, Caroline Sinclair saved my company from collapse. She uncovered $1.1 million in internal embezzlement that our entire accounting team had missed. She rebuilt 5 years of financial records nearly from scratch. He paused. She saved 58 jobs, including my son's. He looked at the gallery. She did it under the name C. Mitchell because she didn't want any connection to her father's reputation influencing her work. Another pause. She refused public credit. She just wanted to fix the problem. Recognition ignited across the room, faces changing, the math visibly rearranging itself behind people's eyes. Daniel Reeves, CEO of Blue Peak Engineering, took the stand next. Ms. Sinclair redesigned our entire financial infrastructure, saved us over $900,000 in the first year alone. We offered her $250,000 annually to join us full-time. He glanced at me. She declined, said she had family responsibilities. Then Lena Joe, CEO of Zenith Urban Labs, calm and precise. Caroline Sinclair earns over $320,000 annually from consulting alone. That doesn't include her salary. She is one of the most sought-after forensic accountants in the state. She turned toward the gallery. And a significant number of the contractors sitting in this room have benefited from her work. Whether they know it or not, recognition spread like fire through dry grass. Wait, see Mitchell? That was her? She handled my audit last year. She saved me from the IRS. I had no idea. My father had gone the color of old concrete. Laura was gripping his arm, whispering urgently about leaving. He didn't move. He just stared at the evidence table like a man who has opened a door expecting a closet and found an ocean. Judge Whitman looked down at him with the measured stillness of someone who has stopped being surprised by human failure. Mr. Sinclair, do you still maintain that your daughter has never held a real job? The sound he made wasn't a word. It was the sound of a man watching everything he believed about himself collapse in real time, in front of the exact people he most wanted to impress. Victor Hale shot to his feet. Your Honor, we request a recess. Sit down, Mr. Hale, the judge said. Your client invited an audience to witness his daughter's humiliation. They may remain to witness the truth. Laura was already edging toward the aisle. You will remain seated, Mrs. Sinclair, the judge ordered. Phones were coming out. One, then a dozen. Charles Whitaker stood again. Daniel, I'm terminating all negotiations with Sinclair Development effective immediately. I don't do business with men who sue their own children for houses those children paid for. One voice followed, then another, then 3 more. His professional network was dissolving in real time, publicly, irreversibly. My father said please, and it wasn't clear who he was saying it to. Judge Whitman looked at me. Miss Sinclair, would you like to address the court? I stood. For the first time in my life, I was not the disappointment in the room. Your Honor, I kept my voice quiet, controlled. Despite everything you've heard today, he's still my father. My father's head came up, tears on his face, openly now, no longer the confident showman who had arrived 2 hours ago, when your business collapsed, when mom left, when the bank started calling. I let each sentence land separately. You were still my father. That's why I did it. Not for recognition, not for gratitude, because that's what family does. We show up, even when it's hard, even when we're invisible. I reached into my bag, but there comes a point when love becomes enabling, when sacrifice becomes self-destruction. I unlocked my phone and read the message my mother had sent the night before. Her words about not being a bank account, not being an emotional punching bag, being her brilliant daughter who deserved respect. Several women in the gallery were nodding. A few were crying. Your Honor, I can't keep living as both his financial safety net and his public embarrassment. I looked at him for the last time that day. Dad, I loved you enough to give up my 20s, my relationships, my health. No shake in my voice anymore. Steady as a column of figures. But love doesn't mean accepting disrespect. It doesn't mean being grateful for scraps of acknowledgement. And it doesn't mean letting you drag me into court to try and take something I already own. Andrew handed me the final document. Your Honor, this is a request for a restraining order. Not because I'm afraid of him physically, but because I need legal boundaries. Real ones. The kind we should have had years ago. I set it on the table. You gave me life, Dad. A pause that held 7 years inside it. I gave you 7 years. I looked at him one last time. We're even. Judge Eleanor Whitman removed her glasses and cleaned them with unhurried precision, while 200 people held their breath. In over 30 years on this bench, she said, I have rarely seen a case that so clearly illustrates the difference between legal wrongdoing and moral failure. She looked at him without accommodation. Mr. Sinclair, you did not simply bring a frivolous lawsuit. You orchestrated a public humiliation of the very person who saved you from ruin. You invited hundreds of people here to watch your daughter fall, only to discover she has been the one holding you up all along. He couldn't look at her. This case is dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Sinclair, you are ordered to pay all legal fees, yours and the defendant's, totaling $62,000. You have no claim now or ever to the Scarsdale property. The gavel came down. Additionally, this court will enter a formal censure into the public record. Your conduct was not only legally baseless, it was morally indefensible. Her voice sharpened. You should be ashamed. This young woman saved your home, your dignity, and asked for nothing but basic respect. Instead, you gave her ridicule and and litigation. She looked at him one last time. You are precisely the kind of father people warn their daughters about. The gavel struck a final time. Court is adjourned. The courtroom exploded. Contracts were terminated before he reached the doors. His professional network collapsed in real time. Each cancellation announced publicly, deliberately, in front of the same audience he had gathered to watch me fall. By the end of the day, the calls had started. By the end of the week, the contracts were gone. Someone live-streamed the entire hearing. By midnight, it had 50,000 views. By morning, 300,000. Worst father in New York. He sued her for a house she paid for. He destroyed himself. Live. Laura's ring hit his car in the parking garage before she got into a rideshare. She lasted exactly as long as the money did. Victor Hale approached me before leaving. His voice was measured, but something in it was genuine. Miss Sinclair, I owe you an apology. I was misinformed. He hesitated. Laura Bennett used to work for our firm. That relationship was never disclosed to the court. She was dismissed for ethical violations. That should have told me everything. My father walked out alone. No entourage, no confidence. Just a legal bill and a reputation in ashes. The Mercedes payment he'd now have to figure out. The boat he'd named Self-Made already heading toward a classified ad. I found him in the parking lot sitting on the hood of his car in the cold November air. Caroline, don't. I kept my distance. Several feet of cold pavement between the person I'd been and the person I was choosing to become. You don't get to play the victim now. You ruined me, he said weakly. I shook my head. No, Dad. You ruined yourself. I just stopped hiding the truth. He looked up, eyes swollen, everything stripped away. The bravado, the performance, the carefully maintained fiction of a self-made man. Why didn't you tell me? His voice cracked on the last word. Would you have let me? I held his gaze. Or would your pride have rather lost the house than accept help from the daughter you called a failure? Silence, heavy, cold. What happens now? He finally asked. Now, I said, you face consequences. Your business survives or it doesn't. Your reputation recovers or it doesn't. But it's not my responsibility anymore. I reached into my bag and pulled out a business card. Dr. Patricia Reeves. She specializes in narcissistic personality patterns and family trauma. You're going to need help understanding why you did this. I held it out until he took it with trembling fingers. And if you actually do the work, then maybe someday we can have a conversation that doesn't end with you humiliating me. I paused, but that's not today. I took a breath, the clean, cold air of late November, carrying the smell of dead leaves and something like the future. The house is mine, legally, morally, practically. He looked like he wanted to argue and found nothing to argue with. You can rent the guest unit, I added, $500 a month below market. I met his eyes. Because despite everything, I'm not cruel, but there will be a lease, rules, and consequences. He stared at me. I'm sorry, he whispered. I shook my head slowly. No, you're sorry you got caught. That's not the same thing. I turned to leave, then stopped. Dad, I'm done being your emotional and financial safety net. I said it without anger, without triumph, just the calm fact of it, stated plainly into the November air. It's time you learn how to stand on your own. And then I walked away, leaving him alone in the parking lot with nothing but the truth and a business card. Epilogue. By Monday, my inbox had 15 new client inquiries, people who had been in that courtroom or watched the recording. The New York Times Metro section ran the story. The Women in Business Council called. 3 executive search firms wrote about me on LinkedIn. Charles Whitaker offered me the CFO position at $400,000 base plus equity. My mother moved into the main level apartment. She filled it with plants and paintings and light. The guest unit became my father's, on a lease more detailed than most corporate contracts. Therapy documented weekly, AA meetings verified, no alcohol on the property, quiet hours enforced, no negative statements about me to anyone. He signed every page without argument. The man who once controlled every room sat quietly and accepted terms from the daughter he had tried to destroy. 3 months later, Dr. Reeves called with his permission. He's been sober 90 days, she said, and he's beginning to understand the patterns. His father spoke to him the way he spoke to you. The difference is, you ended the cycle. In February, an email arrived from the guest unit. He signed it, your tenant, Daniel, not your father. He knew the distinction mattered. During renovations, Sarah Brennan's crew found something hidden inside a wall, a small metal box, a time capsule from 1962, the year my grandfather built the house. Inside, a photograph of the family on opening day and a handwritten note. May this home always shelter those who need it most, and may it never become a source of family conflict. I framed it and hung it exactly where my father's company portrait used to be. For the first time, the house felt like what it was always meant to be. Not a monument, not a battleground, a sanctuary. My ex-husband invited me to his wedding, to humiliate me in front of 300 guests. He even paid for my travel. He had no idea I'd arrive in a Bentley or that I'd be bringing the 2 people who would end his wedding, his engagement, and his freedom in under 4 minutes. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Cream cardstock, embossed lettering, the kind of stationery that costs more per sheet than most people spend on lunch. I turned it over in my hands at my kitchen counter in Malibu, my kitchen in my house overlooking water I had earned the right to look at, and I read Victor Whitmore's name printed in gold foil at the top. My ex-husband was getting married, and he had personally ensured I was on the guest list. I set the card down on the marble countertop, poured myself a coffee, read the handwritten note tucked inside, in Victor's precise architectural script. I hope you can attend, Elena. You deserve deserve the opportunity to witness what a real wedding looks like among people who truly understand refinement and success. Please don't worry about transportation. I've already arranged and covered your travel expenses. I read it twice. Then I smiled for the first time in a way that didn't involve warmth at all, because Victor Whitmore had just made the most expensive mistake of his extraordinarily expensive life, and he had gift-wrapped the opportunity himself. Let me tell you who I was the last time Victor saw me. 5 years ago, on a Thursday evening in March, I was kneeling on the hardwood floor of the apartment we shared in Pasadena. Not metaphorically, literally kneeling, because I had been crying so hard my legs gave out, and the floor caught me when nothing else would. Victor stood above me in a pressed shirt, his weekend bag already packed and waiting by the door like he'd been planning this particular exit for weeks, which I would later understand he had. "You are useless as a wife, Elena," he said. His voice was flat. "Considered the way you'd announce a business decision rather than end a marriage. You have no money, no influence, and you cannot even give me children. You are nothing but a burden weighing down my ambitions, and I refuse to waste my life carrying you any longer." He picked up the bag. "I'm leaving to find someone who understands success and prosperity." The door closed. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever experienced. I stayed on that floor for a long time, long enough for the light to change, long enough for my knees to ache and my throat to go raw and my brain to cycle through disbelief so many times it started to feel like furniture. Just another thing in the room, permanent and heavy. Then I stood up, went to the bathroom, opened the cabinet under the sink, and looked at the pregnancy test I had been too afraid to open all day. 2 lines. I sat on the edge of the tub and stared at the ceiling for so long I lost track of time entirely. Not one child. The ultrasound 6 weeks later would confirm what I already somehow suspected in the part of me that had always been better at reading situations than my heart was willing to admit. Twins, 2 daughters, Victor's daughters, who he would never know existed until the moment I chose to tell him, standing at the altar of his second wedding in front of 300 people, surrounded by the very kind of wealth and influence he had always believed I would never access. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I had been married to Victor Whitmore for 4 years when it ended. 4 years of understanding, slowly and then all at once, that I had married a man who categorized people the way a financial analyst categorizes assets, productive or a liability, rising or declining, worth keeping or worth cutting. For the first 2 years, I was an asset, young, presentable, domestic, devoted. I cooked beautifully. That was the one thing even Victor acknowledged freely. I created the kind of home that made his professional contacts linger after dinner parties. I smoothed the social edges of a man who was fundamentally brilliant and fundamentally cold, and for a while that combination worked. Then the fertility struggles began. 18 months of appointments, of tests with clinical names I had to look up, of procedures that cost more emotionally than financially. Victor attended 3 of those appointments. I stopped counting after he started checking his phone during the 4th. The red flags had been there earlier, of course. They always are. Victor's business partner at the time, a sharp, careful man named Daniel Reyes, pulled me aside at a company dinner 18 months into our marriage and said something I filed away without fully processing. "Elena, you know Victor admires people who bring resources to the table. Just make sure you're protecting yours." I smiled and said I appreciated the advice. I didn't protect anything. I quit the small catering business I had been building since culinary school to focus on the marriage. I stopped taking clients. I let my professional network go dormant. I became, in Victor's taxonomy, entirely domestic, which meant entirely dependent, which meant entirely vulnerable. When he left, I had $4,200 in a checking account, equipment I'd sold 6 years earlier, and a skill set my husband had spent 4 years telling me was charming but inconsequential. He was wrong about almost everything. He was catastrophically wrong about that. The first 6 months were survival in the most literal sense. I was 8 weeks pregnant when Victor left, 12 weeks when I confirmed twins, and 4 months along when I set up a folding table in the kitchen of my $780 a month apartment and made my first batch of croissants to sell, 14 of them, sold to a neighbor who'd smelled them through the hallway. She asked if I could make more on Thursday. I said yes before I fully thought through the logistics. That was February. By June, I had a weekly order list with 22 names on it. By August, I had catered my first private event, a baby shower for 40 people, $600, every dish made in that apartment kitchen with the burner that only worked on medium. The twins arrived in November, Sophia and Clara, 7 pounds each, born 14 minutes apart, identical in the way that makes strangers stop and stare. I was in labor for 11 hours with no one in the waiting room. I named them myself, spelled them myself on the birth certificate, answered the father field with the legal honesty it deserved. I went home with 2 daughters and no one to hand them to, and I put them in the second-hand double bassinet I had assembled alone at 2 a.m. the week before, and I stood over them in the blue apartment quiet and understood something that rearranged the architecture of my ambition permanently. I was not doing this for myself anymore. I was doing this for them, and that changed everything about what I was willing to endure. The business grew the way real things grow, slowly, with setbacks, and then with a momentum that becomes hard to stop once it reaches a certain mass. Year 1, catering and weekend pop-ups, $41,000 gross, every dollar reinvested. Year 2, a commercial kitchen lease, a small staff of 3, a contract with 2 corporate offices for weekly lunch delivery, $180,000 gross. Year 3, the cafe, a 900 square foot space in Culver Culver City that a commercial realtor named Diane Ferris, 15 years in LA hospitality real estate, direct and unsentimental, helped me negotiate into a below-market lease because the landlord had eaten my food at a charity event and wanted me in the neighborhood. The cafe was reviewed in 3 local publications within 4 months of opening. A food blogger with 400,000 followers posted about the morning pastry case, and the comments did not stop for a week. Year 4, a second location in Silver Lake, a third in Manhattan Beach. An investor meeting in a Century City conference room where I sat across from a private equity partner named Sandra Ohm, Stanford MBA, 22 years in consumer brand investment, who told me she had been watching my margins for 6 months and wanted to talk about scale. What do you want this to become? She asked. Something my daughters can be proud of, I said. She nodded once, opened her laptop, and we started talking numbers. Year 5, Whitmore Kitchen, my name, reclaimed deliberately, had 9 locations across Southern California, a wholesale pastry line in 34 grocery stores, and a valuation that would have made Victor Whitmore's jaw come unhinged if he had any idea it was attached to the woman he'd called a burden. He didn't know. I had been careful about that. I lived simply. I drove a sensible car to school pickup. I didn't appear in press photos. I let my legal name run through holding structures that kept my profile quiet in the circles Victor traveled. I wanted him to find out all at once. I just didn't know when. Then the cream cardstock arrived, and I understood the when had chosen itself. I called my attorney, Patricia Chen, the morning after the invitation arrived. Patricia had been my family law attorney since year 2, and had since become something closer to a trusted strategist. 12 years in practice, relentlessly precise, the kind of woman who speaks in complete sentences at all times and never once says, probably. Tell me about Victor Whitmore and Camille Laurent, I said. Patricia didn't pause. Her father is Etienne Laurent. Real estate, development, some private equity. There have been questions about Victor's business practices in 2 of the Laurent Group's joint ventures. Nothing filed yet. Quiet concerns. How quiet? Quiet enough that a wedding would make them go away. A family alliance tends to make business partners more forgiving. I thought about that. Patricia, I said, I need you to pull everything we have on the contracts between Whitmore Capital and Whitmore Kitchen. Silence for 2 seconds. Elena, tell me you haven't been doing business with, not directly, I said, but indirectly, 3 vendor relationships. I think money moved in ways he didn't document correctly. Another pause. How long have you known? Suspected, I said. 4 months. I needed enough to be certain before I did anything with it. And now I have an invitation to a wedding. I heard her exhale slowly. Give me 72 hours. Patricia came back in 48 hours with a forensic accounting consultant named David Park, CPA, 16 years in financial fraud investigation, formerly with the SEC, who had been quietly reviewing the transaction records she had subpoenaed under a civil dispute framework. We met in Patricia's Century City office on a Tuesday afternoon. David Park spread 3 documents across the conference table with the precision of a man who understood that the way you present evidence matters almost as much as the evidence itself. Whitmore Capital routed payments through 2 intermediary vendors who held active supply contracts with Whitmore Kitchen, he said. The vendor relationships created legitimate-looking billing structures, but the invoices don't correspond to services actually rendered. It's billing fraud. The amounts are significant. How significant? Patricia asked. Across 18 months, approximately $340,000 diverted from contractual obligations owed to your company. He said it the way accountants say things. Flat, accurate, without drama. The drama was entirely in the number. $340,000. Victor had used the shell of indirect business relationships to siphon money he owed my company, the company he didn't know was mine, to fund what turned out, upon investigation, to be a lifestyle he could not actually afford, including, David Park noted with clinical neutrality, a $47,000 engagement ring and the deposit on a coastal resort wedding that was going to cost significantly more. He had paid for his new wedding with money stolen from the company built by the woman he'd called useless. The irony was so complete it almost felt constructed. What are our options? I asked. Patricia laced her fingers together. Civil suit certain, criminal referral likely, the question is timing. I looked at the invitation still sitting in my bag. I need 2 more weeks, I said. Patricia studied me. Elena, 2 weeks, then we file everything. I just need to be somewhere first. She looked at me for a long moment with the expression of an attorney who knows exactly what her client is planning and has made a professional decision not to ask. 2 weeks, she said. I spent those 2 weeks doing 3 things. First, I had a private meeting with Etienne Laurent's general counsel, a woman named Renata Solis, who had handled legal matters for the Laurent Group for 11 years. I didn't go through back channels. I called directly, identified myself, and said I had documentation relevant to Victor Whitmore's financial practices that the Laurent family would want to review before any formal family alliance was established. Renata Solis called me back within 4 hours. We met for 90 minutes in a quiet office in Beverly Hills. I brought David Park's summary report and Patricia's preliminary civil filing. I told Renata I wasn't there to destroy anything. I was there to make sure Camille Laurent's family had accurate information before they signed their name to a relationship with a man who had been defrauding business partners for at least 18 months. Renata read the documents carefully. She asked 4 precise questions. She thanked me professionally and told me she would be in touch. She did not tell me what the family would decide. She didn't need to. Second, I called my girls' school and arranged for them to miss 2 days for what I told the administrator was a family event. Sophia and Clara were 5 years old. old. They were curious, fearless, exhaustingly articulate, and looked so precisely like their father that strangers occasionally asked if they were child models cast for a Victor Whitmore lookalike campaign, which obviously no one knew was what they were asking. They had never met him. He didn't know they existed. I told them we were going to a fancy party by the ocean and that they needed to look beautiful. Clara said, "We always look beautiful, Mama." Sophia said, "Will there be food?" Those were my daughters. Third, I called Diane Ferris, my real estate broker, who had by now become something between a professional contact and a genuine friend, and asked her if she still knew the car service that had provided the Bentley Mulsanne for the Culver City location's grand opening event. She laughed. "Elena, what are you planning?" "Something I've earned the right to do," I said. The resort sat on a bluff above the Pacific Coast Highway, the kind of venue that appears in architectural magazines and costs enough per night that the pricing isn't listed anywhere public. Sweeping lawns, stone pathways, the smell of salt air, and expensive florals. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock. I arrived at 3:52. The silver Bentley Mulsanne moved up the resort's private drive at a pace that was slow enough to be noticed. 2 black SUVs followed, discreet, professional, the kind of security detail that reads as either corporate protection or significant private wealth, because it was both. I heard the conversations pause before I stepped out. I felt them. There is a specific quality to the silence that falls over a crowd of wealthy, confident people when something interrupts their certainty about who belongs in a room. It has a texture, a held breath. I wore an emerald gown from a Milan house whose waiting list I had been on for 8 months. The cut was architectural, precise shoulders, clean lines, no ornamentation except the sapphire pieces my daughters had helped me choose at a jewelry appointment they treated as the greatest adventure of their 5-year lives. I stepped out. The whispers started immediately. "Is that Victor's ex-wife?" A woman's voice, close enough that she clearly wasn't trying to be private. Poor thing, she probably came just to see what a real wedding looks like. Victor was standing near the entrance with several of his business contacts. He saw me immediately. I watched his expression cycle through recognition, amusement, and the particular satisfaction of a man who believes he is about to watch something he arranged go exactly as planned. He expected me to look diminished. He expected gratitude or grief or the very specific humiliation of a woman who has spent 5 years being left behind watching the man who abandoned her upgrade. He wasn't prepared for what came next. I turned back toward the car. "Come, my darlings," I said. The door opened. Sophia stepped out first, smoothing her dress the way she had practiced approximately 40 times in the mirror that morning. Clara followed, took her sister's hand, and looked up at the resort with the frank assessment of a child who has been raised around beautiful things and is not easily impressed. They looked like him. There is no gentler way to say it. The shape of the eyes, the precise line of the jaw, the way they held their heads, that particular angle of contained confidence that I had once found compelling in Victor, and now recognized as a genetic inheritance rather than a character trait. Even from 20 feet away, through a crowd, in the golden, late-afternoon California light, the resemblance was so exact that several guests went still in a way that had nothing to do with social performance. It was recognition. Victor's face changed, not gradually, all at once. The satisfaction drained, replaced by something that moved through confusion and landed somewhere between shock and the specific terror of a man who has just understood that a door he believed closed has been open the entire time. We walked forward. His security moved to intercept, then stopped. Because Etienne Laurent's head of security, a composed, gray-suited man who had been briefed by Renata Solis 2 days earlier, had positioned himself near the entrance, and he gave the smallest nod, and the path stayed clear. Camille Laurent stood at the entrance to the ceremony space in a gown that cost more than most people's cars, flanked by bridesmaids and a wedding coordinator with a headset, and the expression of a woman who has managed 400 events and has never seen anything like this one. She looked at me. She looked at my daughters. She looked at Victor. And in her eyes, I watched the specific calculation of a brilliant woman who has just received the piece of information that causes all the other pieces to reorganize themselves into a shape she should have recognized weeks earlier. Victor's voice had lost its certainty entirely. "Elena," he said, how is this Victor?" I kept my voice level, conversational, the tone I used in investor meetings when I needed to be heard clearly across a large conference table. I turned to Camille first. "Camille," I said, "your fiancé invited me here to humiliate me. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to protect you from something you deserve to know before you sign your name to a legal document with this man." The wedding coordinator's headset had gone very quiet. "The ring on your finger," I continued, "and significant portions of this wedding's budget have been funded using money that Victor illegally diverted from contractual obligations owed to my company over the past 18 months. Our attorneys have filed a civil suit this morning. A criminal referral is being reviewed by the DA's office. Your family's assets, if commingled with his in a marital estate, are at legal risk." I reached into my small evening bag and removed a single folded document. The executive summary David Park had prepared, 2 pages, precise and devastating. I handed it to Camille. She read it. She was fast, brilliant, clearly. She read the way lawyers read, scanning structure first, then detail, then implication. The room was so quiet I could hear the ocean. "Victor," she said. Her voice was measured, cold in the way that isn't angry but has moved through anger and come out the other side as something more permanent. "Is this true? Camille, please." He took a step step toward her. Let me explain the context. These are business disputes. They're completely— Is it true? She said again. Or is this another lie? His voice came out wrong. Too many words, too fast, none of them landing. The voice of a man trying to reassemble a narrative that has already collapsed. Her hand moved. The sound crossed the space between them and came back as an echo off the stone walls. Not a performance, not theatrical. A single, clean, definitive act. Fraud only survives when people choose to stay blind, Camille said, pulling the ring from her finger with the practiced calm of a woman who has made harder decisions than this one, and will make harder ones still. This wedding is over. Immediately. She handed the ring to her father without looking at it. Etienne Laurent pocketed it without a word. He looked at Victor with the expression of a man who has been in business long enough to have been defrauded before and has never made the same mistake twice. You'll hear from our legal team this week, he said, simply, then turned away. Victor's security, two men who worked for him, not the venue, moved toward the doors. The venue's security, coordinated with the Laurent team, positioned themselves at the exits with the smooth efficiency of people who had been briefed. Victor was not going to make a quiet exit. He sank, not metaphorically. His knees went to the floor of the ceremony space, in front of 300 people, in his tailored suit, on the polished stone that had been decorated for a wedding that was now being actively dismantled by a wedding coordinator speaking quietly into her headset. He reached toward Sophia and Clara. My daughters, he whispered. The word came out broken, like he was testing whether it belonged to him. Clara took a small step back. Sophia held her ground and looked at him with the direct, unreadable gaze of a 5-year-old who has been raised to look at things clearly. I stepped forward. One step was enough. You lost the right to say that, I said quietly. A long time ago. I took my daughter's hands. We turned. We walked. Behind us, 300 people stood in absolute silence in a ceremony space decorated for a marriage that would not happen. Flowers that cost $40,000 arranged around an altar that was no longer serving its intended purpose. A string quartet holding their instruments without playing. A wedding cake in a back room that no one would cut. We walked through the lobby, across the stone path to the car. The driver opened the door. Clara climbed in and immediately asked if there was a snack. Sophia looked back once at the entrance of the resort with the particular expression she makes when she is processing something and hasn't decided yet what to do with it. Mama, she said. Yes? That man looked like me. I buckled her seatbelt. I know, I said. Is that okay? I looked at her for a moment. Her face, his face, her face, and felt something move through my chest that was neither grief nor triumph, but something quieter and more durable than either. It means you're exactly who you're supposed to be, I said. Now get in. She got in. The door closed. The Bentley moved down the resort's private drive, back toward the PCH, back toward Malibu, back toward the life I had built from a folding table and 14 croissants and the specific, unbreakable knowledge that no one was coming to rescue me. I had rescued myself. I had brought 2 people into the world who didn't need rescuing at all. The civil suit settled 8 months later. $340,000 in restitution, plus legal fees, plus a separate settlement with the Laurent Group that I was not party to, but that industry contacts later described to me as career-ending in this market. Victor's investment firm dissolved within the year. Patricia Chen called me when the final settlement transferred and said, in her complete sentence way, the money is in the account. Everything is resolved. Thank you, I said. Elena, a pause. She didn't add unnecessary words. You built something real? I did. 2 weeks after the wedding, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Camille. I wanted to say thank you. You didn't have to do what you did the way you did it. You could have just filed the suit. I thought about that for a minute before I responded. You deserve to know before you signed anything. I would have wanted someone to tell me. She replied after a few minutes. For what it's worth, your daughters are remarkable. You can tell. I looked at the message for a long time. Then I put the phone down and went to the kitchen, where Sophia was attempting to teach Clara a card game she had invented with rules that changed whenever Clara was winning, and the evening light was coming through the Malibu windows the way it does in that last hour before dark, gold and low and warm, turning everything it touches into something worth looking at. Victor Whitmore had called me useless, a burden, without influence, without money, without value beyond what I could provide to his ambitions. He had said these things to my face while I was on the floor, believing I was alone. He never knew I was already carrying the 2 best things that would ever happen to me. He never knew that his judgment was not a verdict. It was a starting line, and I had been running ever since.